Is the government targeting the wrong waste? In a viral House Foreign Affairs hearing on March 17, 2026, Representative Jared Moskowitz delivered a masterclass in pointing out political hypocrisy. While critics call for the end of USAID, Moskowitz highlights the $2.5 trillion missing from a Pentagon that hasn't passed an audit in 8 years. Comparing government spending to the budgets of Barbie and Jurassic Park, he asks, why are we giving the Pentagon a pass while trying to kill essential foreign aid? We're breaking down the full script and the 2026 oversight battle over the State Department's new responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kaplan, you spoke about issues and accountability at the UN and mentioned that we should tighten mandatory disclosure requirements and add clear consequences for failure to comply. Can you provide some more details on what you think that should look like, and would you recommend additional auditing and transparency tools?
Absolutely. Thanks for that question. It's just a constant source of frustration. It should frustrate every single American taxpayer where money is going to the United Nations, where money continues to go to UN agencies. Again, they're a one bucket of recipient. You have UN agencies, NGOs, and contractors. When it comes to the UN, we have the least enforcement remedies available. We have the least access and the least transparency in that. So I think there's absolutely means to tighten up. In the 2024 Appropriations Act, there's a specific clause, Section 7048, if you're keeping score at home, that requires the Secretary of State to seek to implement in all agreements with the UN access for the USAID IG, State IG, and GAO. That is essential, and failure to comply with that should either result in not receiving an award or reward remedies for noncompliance.
All right, well, I appreciate that, and I agree. I want to go with this logic for a second, that because there was waste, fraud, and abuse in USAID, we should get rid of it, right? Which, that was the argument. I assume you would agree that in a $7 trillion budget, we could probably find, in fact, we have found waste, fraud, and abuse in every department, right?
That's why you have inspectors general to root it out.
That's right. So there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the Pentagon, right?
Correct.
And there's waste, fraud, and abuse in DHS.
Yes.
In fact, we just saw the other day, $200 million, right, to be spent on advertising, right? That sounds like a waste to me. I mean, it was more money that was spent on the last Jurassic Park movie, or one of the Lord of the Rings movies, or one of the Harry Potter movies. I think the Barbie movie was less expensive. In fact, I think every movie except one that was nominated for an Oscar was less expensive than what Kristi Noem spent. To spend $200 million, Kristi Noem, and not get nominated by an Oscar, I think shows their liberal bias. So there's definitely waste, right? But no one's talking about getting rid of those places. No one's talking about, just because we're spending, $9 million on crab legs in the Pentagon, or $220 million on furniture in the Pentagon, or, $100,000 on a Steinway piano in the Pentagon. No one's talking about getting rid of the Pentagon just because there's waste, fraud, and abuse, right? That would be unreasonable, Mr. Kaplan. You agree?
No one's talking about getting rid of those agencies.
Right, of course, right? So it would be, and that's where the disconnect is here, is that somehow, because this agency, no different than all the other agencies, we could sit, HUD, Department of Agriculture, we could go through them, right? There's waste, fraud, and abuse, and we owe it to the American people, by the way, to eliminate that waste, fraud, and abuse. There's no excuse for that, okay? We owe it to them. But in the search of trying to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse doesn't mean we should get rid of an entire agency. No, we should eliminate the waste, fraud, and abuse from those agencies, because all of these agencies still have important functions. Obviously, the Pentagon, we're not getting rid of the Pentagon, even though they haven't been able to pass an audit 8 years in a row. There's over $2.5 trillion, let me say that again, over $2.5 trillion missing in the Pentagon, like real money, okay? And no one's talking about getting rid of it. And so, that's the function of the problem I have. Look, in my own household budget, right? I can tell you my kids are definitely, there's tons of waste in my family budget based on what my kids like to spend, okay? There's definitely abuse going on. And based on the amount of boxes that show up at my house every day, my wife is definitely committing fraud, okay? But the point is, I'm not getting rid of these people, right? What am I gonna do? I'm gonna sit them down at the kitchen table, and I'm gonna say, we need to spend less, right? What are we spending on? We didn't have that conversation here with USAID. We never got to say, hey, look, these programs, delete them. These things, get rid of them, okay? Every other agency somehow is getting that benefit of the doubt, right? We're giving that benefit of the doubt to the Pentagon. I want to end with this. Now that these functions are going to move over to the State Department, all right, Mr. Kaplan, do you think the State Department has the resources, the personnel to do all of this oversight, the grant oversight, you know, to the capacity to handle all of this without adding more personnel to the State Department?
Let me begin with this, Congressman Moskowitz. I can assure you that the same vile predators that sought to steal from USAID or divert funds to terrorist organizations or sexually abuse minors like they did in the Ebola response will try to do the same thing at state.
Yeah, and look, that's all terrible. We all support, you know, clamping down on that and getting rid of it. My question is, do you think the State Department at this juncture needs additional resources now that they have all this additional responsibility?
You know, contrary to media reports, foreign assistance programs are not dead, and there are billions and billions and billions of dollars now being spent and administered by not only State Department,
my
but
time is up. I'm just trying to get an answer. So, okay, yes, I'm with you. But do you now think that now that that is all moved over to the State Department, do they need more resources to limit the fraud, waste, and abuse? Because otherwise, aren't we going to wind up in the same situation where there's going to be fraud, waste, and abuse because we're not investing in that oversight?
Maximum oversight is essential, and that's what we brought as the IG for USAID. And when you have billions going out in complex emergency environments and money spent overseas in areas controlled by terrorist organizations and any armed group, you need adequate staffing, people, good monitoring, and an effective IG to oversee and investigate any misuse of those funds.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on March 17, 2026, took a sharp turn into the theater of the absurd as Representative Jared Moskowitz challenged the prevailing narrative on government waste. Using a strategy of reductio ad absurdum, Moskowitz took the logic being used to justify the shuttering of USAID and applied it to every other department in the $7 trillion federal budget. He argued that if waste, fraud, and abuse were the sole criteria for dismantling an agency, the United States wouldn't have a government left. The centerpiece of his argument was the staggering contrast between the scrutiny placed on foreign aid and the benefit of the doubt given to the Department of Defense, an agency that has failed its audit 8 years in a row. Moskowitz used pop culture references to make the massive numbers digestible for the American taxpayer, noting that the $200 million spent by the government on advertising was more than the production budgets of Barbie, Jurassic Park, or Lord of the Rings. By highlighting specific Pentagon waste, such as $9 million crab legs, $100,000 Steinway pianos, and over $200 million in furniture, he painted a picture of a defense establishment that is essentially unaccountable. The most explosive claim, however, was the missing $2.5 trillion at the Pentagon. Moskowitz's point was clear: if we aren't talking about getting rid of the Pentagon for losing trillions, why are we talking about getting rid of USAID for issues that are statistically a drop in the bucket? As we move through March 2026, the legislative context of this hearing is critical. The shift of USAID functions to the State Department has created a massive oversight vacuum. Moskowitz's questioning of witness Mr. Kaplan revealed a deep concern that the State Department currently lacks the resources, personnel, and maximum oversight capacity to handle these new billions in foreign assistance. He argued that by cutting the very agencies designed for oversight, like the Inspectors General, the government is effectively inviting the vile predators and terrorist organizations to divert even more funds. Ultimately, this hearing serves as the definitive 2026 critique of the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and its impact on foreign policy. Moskowitz's comparison of the federal budget to his own household budget, humorously accusing his children of abuse and his wife of fraud, was a calculated move to show that while you root out the waste, you don't get rid of the people. In the high-stakes environment of 2026, this video remains primary evidence of the fight to maintain a functional government infrastructure against what Moskowitz characterizes as a partisan search and destroy mission disguised as efficiency.